Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Really interesting question this, because I don't think I knew at all what I wanted to be when I grew up. I remember I remember my sister, all she wanted to do was work on the checkout at the supermarket. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember having any idea of what I wanted to do. I remember being really, having a really strong sense of fairness and justice, and from a very young age, like really being very strong. And remember my dad always saying, "You'll grow out of that." But at that point, I don't think I had any idea that you could turn that into a job. Like that could be something that would be something that you would do when you grew up. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really strong memory for me, you know, like going along to at primary school to the headmaster's office and asking why, you know, why girls weren't allowed to play football and why boys weren't allowed to play netball. I didn't understand those things. So often probably quite challenging, and just seeing the world and thinking these things aren't right. And so I remember that being a really strong memory from being quite small, but no real sense of work or what I wanted to be when I grew up at all.
You're listening to Series 5, Episode 17, and to my guest, Claire Turner. This is another in-person interview recorded on the Rode Wireless Go 2, recorded on the 14th of May, 2024. Hello, listener. Claire Turner is the Chief Executive of Carers Leeds. She has over 20 years' experience in the voluntary sector in a career which has spanned research, policy and service delivery. Her previous roles include Director of Evidence at the Centre for Ageing Better and Head of Research and Policy at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Prior to this, Claire was a senior associate in a regeneration consultancy firm and held a number of roles with Barnardo's policy and research unit. Claire is a trustee of SJOG Hospitaller Services, a national charity which supports older people, disabled people and people experiencing homelessness and modern-day slavery to live the lives they choose and fulfil their potential. Claire joined Carers Leeds in July 2021. Right, let's do this. Episode 127 of Working Hours with Claire Turner. Let's jump straight into what you're doing now.
Yeah. So what I'm doing now, so my current job is I'm Chief Executive of a charity called Carers Leeds. So we work across the city with unpaid carers. So that's somebody who is caring for a family member or a friend. And I've worked in the voluntary community, sort of third sector, whatever you want to call it, for most of my working life. And really fell into that, actually.
Okay.
So when I was at school, I stayed on school, did my A-levels, and then I was thinking about going to university, and nobody in my family had ever been to university, so I didn't really have a clue about this world. And at school, there wasn't really a lot set up for helping you understand that, what to do, or what was even available in terms of courses. So I remember my dad saying to me, well, you need to do a course that gets you a job. So it's probably the first time in my teenage life that I ever listened to my dad and his advice, which was based on absolutely nothing because he'd obviously never been to university. And so I ended up doing a law degree. And I think it was because that was a kind of, it was linked to a job, and people were like, I've done quite well at school, so you could do this. So arrived in Newcastle to do my law degree, and quite quickly realised that whilst it was quite interesting, it wasn't really for me. It wasn't really my kind of world. And I was like, this isn't quite what I want to be doing. And so stumbled across a ad for volunteering with the Samaritans, the kind of suicide prevention. I thought, oh, that sounds quite interesting.
Was that while you were still at uni?
Yeah. And started to do that. And then over time, did that for a number of years, like post-university, but started to realise that there was this, that was all voluntary, but they were part of a national organisation, and actually the people did jobs in this kind of world. And so that's how I ended up, I think, being, doing the kind of job I'm doing now, but being in this completely different world, a world away from growing up in the East Riding of Yorkshire and not really knowing anything about, what was available work-wise beyond the kind of standard jobs that you heard about. So for me, it was a really, really sort of pivotal thing that it just opened up a completely different world. And most people I knew were going, why are you doing that? Like, that's really hard. That sounds really hard. And, but for me, it linked back to that idea of, it was important. It was something that you could contribute to, you could try and make a difference. So I think for me, that took me from, having no idea about what I wanted to do, going into something that was interesting, but clearly not for me, to ending up in, running a charity in Leeds and obviously there's a lot in between all of that. But for me, that was a very, very sort of pivotal opportunity that really I stumbled upon. I didn't seek it out.
How was the experience of going into Newcastle? Because you just said you came from somewhere quite small in East Riding. Was that, did you always want to get out of small town into big city? Or so did that live up to expectations, or was that a shock? Or
I loved living in Newcastle, and that was part of, again, this whole process of deciding where I would apply to was pretty much entirely based on, I want to live in a city, don't want to live, I grew up in a village, went to school in a small town, and there are lots of things that are good about that, but I was really desperate to kind of leave and to be somewhere bigger. And I think luckily made some brilliant friends there very quickly, who I'm still friends with now, like lifelong friends. So very much felt part, even though the course, I was like, I'm not sure this is quite for me. Being there with those friendships and it was definitely a really, even if the course didn't quite work out in the way that I wanted it to, moving to Newcastle and being in a big city and, living a really different life was something that was really exciting. Absolutely.
I mean, doing the Samaritans must have been, I guess, a shock. I mean, it's going to be, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was like, this is easier than I thought. Or like, how was that experience?
I think it probably was a shock in some ways in terms of, but also I think what was really good about it was because the principle around Samaritans is listening. So it's not about you being an expert. It's not about giving advice. It's about the absolute opposite of that. That you're there to listen and create space for someone who's talking about something that they probably couldn't talk to anyone else about. And actually for me, even though I was, 19, 20, that guidance was incredibly useful because I wasn't there to try and talk somebody out of committing suicide or to give them a reason to live or to offer them advice or words of wisdom or something. That it was about, your job is to listen and is to really listen and is to provide that space for people to talk about the things that are really difficult, but actually your job is there to hold that space and to listen. And actually that was incredibly powerful. And of course, at times, very difficult. But actually, I think I didn't feel... Some people might have felt a bit powerless in that situation. You know, this idea that your job is to kind of rescue people or to...
It seems passive, doesn't it? It seems like you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
But like, that's incredibly powerful, because one of the main things is, and one of the reasons I do this is because who listens, you know? Like, who is listened to? Who gets to speak and be heard much these days? Most of us feel like we're not listened to, I think. Yeah,
and I do think it is really, it was such an important learning experience as well for me, because it is quite hard sometimes, isn't it, to sit, like say, and to listen, and to not jump in, and that's the kind of thing you probably do with friends and family, isn't it? That you know, whereas actually that art of going, my job isn't to do any of those things. It's, you know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. This person, who else is someone going to speak to at this time of night? You know. And so I do really think that for me, it was just showed the power of something like that. This amazing setup where, you know, all the local Samaritans are run entirely by volunteers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a phenomenal thing, isn't it? To run for years and years and years. And so to be part of that, I thought, well, this is incredible. And, you know, you're in some kind of tiny office, you know, in some dilapidated building, and, you know, the technology just about works. I think we started, when I sort of latterly, I think they just started an email thing, and, you know, but so for me, it was a really, really incredible thing to do. And I thought, oh, okay, here we go. This is something that is, this is another world that I had no idea that existed in my sort of childhood and growing up. We kind of understood there were charities, but didn't really obviously have any idea. You just thought there were sort of charity shops on the high street or something. Yeah,
and they always seem to be for a particular cause, like Heart Foundation, cancer, like or a specific niche of something.
Exactly.
Whereas I've said it a number of times. When I started doing this, I started sort of following various third sector organisations on social media, and just no idea how many and how varied, and like, because you think, surely, you know, Leeds would be covered with, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever. There's got to be hundreds. There's got to be hundreds.
And I think, and so I think it's really... I think lots of people just don't really realise that, do they? The kind of scale and the breadth and the kind of different things that these organisations are doing. But for me, it was incredibly important time for me in terms of really thinking, oh, okay, this is going to change. This is what I want to be part of. Now figuring out, how do you do this as a job?
So why not healthcare, medicine, nursing, doctors? Was it too much gore?
I'm definitely the most squeamish person. The most squeamish person you've ever met. So definitely not on the kind of, I would be no good to anyone in it. But like emotional crisis, I'm your woman. Physical injury, no.
I'll counsel everyone dealing with that.
Please, can you see the blood? Because I can't look. That's definitely me. I don't know. Honestly, I really don't know. I feel as well like... for me, there wasn't, and there still is. It's
a calling, isn't it?
It's partly a calling, but there's also combined with not really having a plan.
Yeah.
So going, oh, that's kind of interesting. Oh, right. You know, like law, like, you know, I don't remember thinking about it very deeply, doing a law degree, which is a massive decision, isn't it, to go to. I just remember thinking, I want to get out of East Riding, do something different.
You know, it's the degree that most people don't pursue a career in. So it's the most common degree, and then the most common one that people don't pursue law in. Yeah.
I can believe it, because I think you know, as I say, the friends that I have had since that time, you know, 4 of us studied law. None of us are practicing law. None of us. Really interesting, isn't it? And I do think it probably is that kind of thing where people go, oh, you're quite clever. You've done quite well in your exams. You know, do something like this. You know, and no real advice about university, what kind of courses. I'm sure I would have loved something like politics, but just didn't. I honestly have no sense that those things were things you could just study
or were for you.
Yeah.
Like if they exist, it's like, well, but are they for me? They're not for me.
Yeah.
That's not my kind of thing. I do these things over here.
I think it definitely is that. Yeah. I think it's definitely that, and I think coming from a family who were hugely supportive, but again had no sense of this world, of what was. And also I think if you come from a family where, my mum and dad were working class, they had needed to earn money, that was what you did, this kind of idea that they had high aspirations for me and my sister, but no real sense of what that meant other than the kind of things that they knew about, which I think is quite familiar to lots of people, isn't it? That, and so I think this idea of, is it, what's for you? And I think I must have felt with the Samaritan stuff that I was like, oh, this is for me. I don't quite know what it means. I don't quite know where it'll take me, but this, this feels something that lots of people are telling me they would really find hard to do. And I knew it was hard, but I didn't feel that way about it.
So how do you get from there to here? I mean, we don't have to go through the whole CV.
Yes, you don't need my CV.
Sort of like, so have you stayed within the third sector the whole time? Has it always been like, has it been, I mean, when you look back retrospectively, does it seem like, it all makes sense coming to here and it was your destiny? Or was there a plan? Was there a goal of like...
There definitely... Oh, no, I don't think... Again, I think it's sort of, for me, it's always been about take the next step, what you're interested in. So I knew... I've always been quite ambitious in the sense that I wanted to move and to do things. So I think there has always been that in me, but never in a planned way. So I think I ended up, after uni, I ended up at Barnardo, so a big children's charity. And they did like a sort of graduate internship.
Where was that?
So I was in Leeds, but it was a national sort of role. So I did that, and that was in a sort of more like policy and research. So really thinking about supporting the Barnardo sort of services that were for children and families, and thinking about what research we want to do to complement that. What are the asks of national or local government that would help change the lives of children? And you're seeing
that machinery operate for the first time as well,
Yeah, so really interesting, really, really interesting. And so that's where I kind of started, and then stayed in those kinds of roles. So I worked at an organisation called the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So again, very focused on research and policy and how you create change around poverty. And lastly, for an organisation called Centre for Ageing Better, which was a similar kind of organisation, same kind of roles, but focusing on later life. And so had always worked in those kind of areas. So for national organisations generally, working on policy and research roles, and kind of worked my way up to be a sort of director of kind of in that world. And found it incredibly interesting. I think worked a lot in London. A lot of the national organisations either have a sort of central office in London, or you were, because it was all about national policy generally, you were to be down in London quite a lot. So that was quite exciting to be part of that. And again, working in those kind of roles, often with quite a few people that were, again, from a very different world to me, quite a lot of privately educated, people who...
There's a lot of very wealthy people in philanthropy and charity.
Yeah. And so they were all organisations with quite a lot of money. They had money to spend.
And old foundations and stuff, because you've mentioned Joseph Rowntree, but there's a whole bunch of these things, isn't there?
Yeah. And a really interesting world to be in. And I think, real exposure to, trying to understand how government really works, I found that incredibly interesting, and I really enjoyed all of the roles that I had. And I think I'd got to the point in my last role where the thing that I was feeling a little bit was that I was getting further and further removed in a way from the reason that brought me.
I was going to ask you that.
To the sector in the first place.
Yeah. So you're doing, you've moved up, so you're doing larger order change, ideally.
Yeah.
But you're not seeing the effects of that.
No.
And that's kind of the importance, especially coming from somewhere like the Samaritans to now.
Yeah. So it did feel that. I thought, oh, it's not having that feeling that I did when I first came into this all, thinking this is what this is all about. And so at that point, I was like, I'd really, again, wondered, and I've always been more of a person who, again, never had a plan, never had a specialism. You know, some people become experts in a way, don't they, on a particular issue or a particular skill. And I always saw myself as quite a generalist, and I was always very happy with that. And I remember thinking, do you think I could... The next step would be chief exec. Do you think I remember going around and thinking, could I do that? Is that something that I could do? And thought, well, I'll give it a go and apply for some job and see what. And at that point, I was doing a lot of work in London. I thought, live in Leeds. I want to be in Leeds. I want to be working. I want to be living and working in the community.
Is this pre-COVID?
So this is probably...
Or around?
Around COVID, which I think is probably, a familiar story for some people, isn't it? A bit of reassessing and going, am I in a space where is this really for me? Do I feel like I'm doing, what I really want to be doing? And so I decided to make that change and thought, well, I think that's something I would enjoy, the breadth of it, and also being closer to sort of, the reason I wanted to join the kind of voluntary sector in the first place. So luckily applied for this job at Carers Leeds, got the job, and here I am, 2.5 years later. And I do the things I thought I would love about it, the proximity to thinking about actually how are we making a difference and supporting carers in our city is the thing that motivates me. And the breadth of things you get to do as a chief exec, a lot of responsibility. And
you're not cordoned off here. It's basically a hub, isn't it? So you will see people coming in and out. So I'm assuming, so correct me if I'm wrong, that you will know plenty of the carers by name from here.
Absolutely. And I think it's, and for me, it's, so it's really exciting. And for me to be able to also try and bring some of those things from that other world, because it does feel, we talked about the charities, the voluntary sector is massive and diverse. So, Carers Leeds is completely different from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, but there are things to bring from these different bits of the sector, I think. So I feel very much like it's a big job and it's challenging, but actually this definitely, I feel back in a space where I'm like, okay, I'm doing what I should be doing.
Yeah, this is right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered how you got into it.
Yeah.
Let's jump straight into COVID then, because that's still kind of part of the same story. So were you, so I break it down into two bits. There's going in and coming out.
Yeah.
So as we were told we were going into lockdown, bearing in mind that people were locking down before that. But what changed for you when we went into lockdown? Were you working more, working less, or did it not change? And then coming out of COVID, has there been any permanent changes in the way that you work? And I think at this point, there's no one that can say no.
Yeah, it'd be very unusual, wouldn't it? Yeah. So going in, what was it, March 2020, wasn't it, where we were like, yes, everyone stay at home now. I was working at the Centre for Aging Better. I was commuting to London.
Were you in London at the time?
So I was living in Leeds, but coming to London every week for 2 days.
Because we kind of knew on the Friday and they said the Monday evening, didn't they?
Yes.
So I'm guessing, were you...
Yes. So I
down there for the Friday, and then you were like, I'm not going to be there Monday, sort of thing.
Yeah. So I used to go down, so at that point I was job sharing. So there was two of us doing the full-time role. So I was working maybe 3 days, and I was working 2 in London and 1 at home. So I would go down on Tuesday, Wednesday. So I remember the week before, I would always bring my laptop home because obviously I'd be working at home. But yeah, leaving on that kind of Wednesday, whatever being the Wednesday before. And then, that would then, so having gone to London for 2 days, every week for 4 years, I was at home. And I think as an organisation, we were very geared up. Everyone had laptops. You know, a lot of stuff was done. You know, we weren't necessarily having meetings and things online.
You'd be working on the train and stuff like that anyway. So it was.
So I think that side of things. But yes, and then everything went. And then I have 2 boys. They were both at primary school. So the logistics of all that lots of parents had to do, which was homeschool in inverted commas, keep the kids busy whilst you tried to go on calls.
Just do what they've told you to do.
Yes, please.
Leave me alone.
Yes, please. Yes, you can have another snack. Yes, whatever. There was a lot of that, and dragging them out for walks, and they were like, oh. But yeah, so it really was, being at home, everything moving online.
So did the work levels stay about the same, or were you sort of ringing around people going, can we still have money? Do you still need this?
So we were all right for that, I think. And I think most people, I think for me, probably more as a sort of manager, was just trying to focus on the people. You know, so for example, we would have families with young children, so there wasn't any childcare because you weren't a sort of essential worker. We had younger members of staff in shared houses in London with no space to work. So for me, I felt like, well, we've got, we were in even though the kids were younger, they weren't really little, and both of us, me and Tim, were at home. So we were like, right, well, actually it's sort of difficult, but actually in lots of ways wasn't as anywhere near as difficult for so many other people, and including people I was working with directly. So a lot of the focus was on the adjustments to be real about what people could and couldn't do. And so some things slowed down, I think, project-wise. Obviously, we were an organisation that had it was a foundation, so it had money. So in lots of ways, I think it was quite protected, that actually it was easy to be flexible, and lots of things either maybe slowed down. So some of the research projects, especially if they were out in the community, were obviously not happening, and trying to adapt those things. But I think, in lots of ways, it was an easier adjustment than lots of other people would have had to make, to be honest.
So, this is slight tangent, but so if you were in this post now going into that lockdown, because it sounds like that there was the money side of things where they were looking at that and they're taking care of it. You now be in a position to be doing that as well, or overseeing it to some degree. Do you think you'd have coped, or how do you think you would have coped with that? Because to a degree, some of that pressure's off, but you've still got all that pressure to manage everyone else and their expectations. But someone's taking care of at least that bit for you. Like in this position, that'd be on your to-do list as well.
100%. Yeah, and I think it's a real, and I'm sure it will have been, for lots of chief execs across sort of charities going, right, what do we do now?
There's no roadmap for it, is there? And you've no idea how long it's lasting for.
And I think that also just even the things around the technology aspects, people being able to work from home, it was not a thing that lots of people did. And so the idea that it's not even just give them a laptop, is it? It's like it needs to be set up, it needs to be secure, and they need to have an internet connection and a space to work in. Yeah, absolutely. And for organisations, like Carers Leeds, you've got the mix of, okay, well, how do we get everybody geared up in the staff team, but also what are people facing out there? For the carers that we support, life is, again, incredibly challenging.
How do we stay in touch with them, and how do we also give them what they need without, sort of it's that being supportive thing, isn't it? It's like, when is it hassle and when is it help?
And really acknowledging that for some people, if you're an unpaid carer for somebody who, has a long-term health condition, or you have a sort of range of things that can help you. So somebody goes to a day centre, or you have people coming in to provide help and care, you know, those things stopping, it's a massive impact on people, isn't it? And we already know carers can often feel isolated, and that caring can have a massive impact on your health and well-being, you know. And so actually you add something like COVID into that mix, I think the level of need, you know, becomes enormous. And I think we see that legacy still. We see that legacy still with people who, you know, over that period of time, you know, if you're caring for someone with dementia and their condition has really deteriorated, the things that were offered to you before COVID probably not suitable now. And your level of comfort with leaving somebody on their own or with somebody else, you know, for some people that's a massive shift. It's already a difficult thing to do. Carers talk a lot about feeling guilt, or, you know, the idea that it's difficult to take a break because you're worrying about the person you care for and are they going to be looked after. I think that has really, you know, that's been really compounded by COVID for people. And I think it does leave a legacy that I think for lots of people, you know, a lot of people have moved on, if that's the right phrase, isn't it? And life is
the news cycle's moved on.
Yeah. But for some people that fear is still there, and also that, adjusting to, I think for lots of people it was really tough.
I think a lot of anger as well. I don't know if you see that, but, you know, like you said, that was a really, really difficult, intense time for a lot of people. And there's no recognition. It's like, why don't we have a memorial day or anything? Like, I'd be all for, you know, a symbolic blackout or something. In fact, a lot of people died. That was a lot of and it was something that everybody went through. And I think from a caring perspective, you know, obviously you'll have a bunch of new carers, after that, from the natural rate, but also caused by that, caused by the stress of that and the knock-on effects. And various losses, or people who had to care for someone that they lost, and then now they need care, and all of these situations. So I would guess that there would be some resentment still.
And also I do think for some people, like we do a sort of annual survey of carers every year, and we're asking people, you know, what are they worried about, what they're most concerned about right now, what matters most to them. And we ask people about their access to services, for example, both for themselves and for the people they care for. And, you know, when we asked people for this year's survey, you know, about barriers to people accessing services, worries about COVID was still there. You know, for like, I think it might have been up to 20% of people. You know, so I think people, you know, particularly if someone's got a health condition that...
Well, there's also the long COVID effects as well. I mean, that's a kind of fraught area because we don't know where we are with it. But my kind of leaning is that, it's a thing, and we're doing the thing that we normally do of that we did with COVID of it's not real. Okay, it is real, but it's not going to happen. Okay, it is happening, but it's not going to happen here. Okay, it's happening here, but it's not going to happen to me.
And so I do think, there's definitely a kind of legacy for some of the people that we support. Absolutely. And real worries, and like you say, for some people, real trauma, isn't it? Real trauma from what they've been through, and I think so I do think that, and I think as an organisation, I suppose thinking about what Carers Leeds is, sort of what's different about Carers Leeds, kind of sort of post-COVID, if that's the right phrase to use. I think some of that brings more flexibility for staff, you know, the kind of things that we see quite a lot, isn't it? That actually, you know, we look at our staff team, half the staff are also unpaid carers outside of work. So actually the things we would advocate for other employers to do, we have to do ourselves. It's really important.
There's all the, you know, health and mental health and well-being element, which was very, very, you know, obviously became a really much bigger thing during COVID.
And I think that flexibility of where people work, you know, so we have people coming in, you know, we sort of want people to be either in work, in the office, or out in the community, because that's who we're serving, about 60% of their working time, 40% at home, you know, depending on roles, you know, it varies more or less depending on roles and any other kind of health and caring needs that people have. I think we are, trying a lot more to use online tools, but as well as, I think for lots of carers, people want the face-to-face contact or a telephone contact as opposed to, that kind of, we moved a lot of groups and support online as well as the telephone, but that's not continued in the way that we thought it might. That I think lots of people, particularly those people who work, don't really want to go and log on at night and attend a group. And they want to sit with people and have a conversation about these things, because that's, some of the things we do is run peer support groups, and that's for people to be able to share.
And they want to
what
get
it's
out.
really like.
They want to get out, and they want to, and I would imagine sometimes they want to get away.
Yeah.
It's like, I spend all my time caring for this person.
Yeah, I need some time for me.
Yeah, I need some me time, and I need to be away from it, and I need to know that they're okay.
Yeah.
But...
And so I do think those things. So I think we haven't seen a sort of hybrid staying within the service we provide. Even though digital is a really important part of what we do, and I think a growing area, but it'll never be.
It's an extra
addition,
tool, isn't it? Yeah.
It'll never be a substitute for the face-to-face and the telephone. But for some people, it's particularly being able to contact. People initially want to contact by an email or going on the website, having a look or whatever. But it's definitely an addition to our service as opposed to replacing those really core things, like you say, that people want to sit alongside someone and have a conversation, and I think that's often done, particularly in groups, isn't it? Better done face to face.
Because it's as much about if you're wanting someone to listen to you, right? Not necessarily to speak. What do you want? You want in presence, and you want in attention, So I was going to sort of use a segue into the social media question of, have you seen these sort of care robots? Have you seen any stuff about prototype?
Yeah.
So I think I think it was in Germany, they had a few in an old people's home that were sort of like dispensing medicines and things, and they would put on smiley faces and stuff, and some people, and they've said, some people respond to it and liked it and stuff. I completely disagree. I don't think that can ever be useful. Like maybe an animal companion or something, but you need something living, I think.
I think my view on it is that...
I mean, if it helps, it helps.
Yeah. I think it can't replace, because what often people talk, about, and what is really important to us as humans, isn't it, is generally those meaningful relationships and that human contact. That's part of what it means to be human. And actually, I can't imagine the robot can replace that in any way, because I think it is about relationships and it is about that human contact and connection. I suppose what's interesting, in some cases is, in a way, what those things could be used for. So, for example, if you have a disability, which means you need help getting out of bed in the morning, or you need some basic tasks being done, for some people, they want that done by a human, they want to have a relationship, they want to have a conversation, they want contact. Whereas for some people, they just want the task to be done. And actually, if that meant that task could be done when you want it to be done, as opposed to, well, the schedule says 7 o'clock is when we have to come. And you don't want to get up out of bed at 7 because you're like a lion. Or you've been awake
for 2 hours and you can't.
Or the next day you might. Or the next day you might want something else. So I think the challenge that we have, I suppose, with human care, which is really important, is it's still very compartmentalised. And so what you get access to is 4 15-minute visits still. And that's all kinds of wrong, isn't it? And we would need, the idea will be to change that.
Your health ration.
Yeah. And that it's got to, and the people that work in those sectors are phenomenal, and they're trying to do all of these things. So that's what, whereas if you could have something that could do those very functional tasks at a time that suited you, if you were the kind of person that was less bothered about whether that was a human or not that gave you your medication, because you've already got the other stuff, but you just want it when you want it. I think there's a place for it if that's the way it could be imagined. Because I think that is about, for some people, the time these things happen is, and just getting on with it is much more important than the person doing it is somebody that they know So I think that's, for me, is where there's a place for it. That if you're saying, actually, if what you could do is, it could be functional, but actually could really, really be flexible. Because, I know that often for people, they say, well, they can only come at this time. And we all know in different days, don't you? You feel differently. I can get up whenever I like. Well, not whenever I like, obviously. I've got 2 kids and a job. But do you know what I mean? Yeah. You're not dictated to, or I can go to bed at a time. And it's not the same time. Whereas the way that we organise and structure care is often, by its very nature, it has to be rationed and kind of rotated, doesn't it? And I think that's why. So I think there's a place, but I think it's not a substitute for people helping other people, because we know that, again, I talk about a lot with care, to care for another person is what it means to be human. It's fundamental to us as people, isn't it? It's a hugely valuable thing you can do for somebody else. And that's why we exist, to support carers, because we know that this is a hugely valuable thing that they're doing. But also it's really hard, and it's not really designed for one person to do on their own.
And it's not very well paid, if at all.
No, and for the carers that we speak to, the sort of the benefit system, I think a lot in the news, isn't there, lately, around carers allowance and, the kind of punitive treatment of carers. So I think it's a misnomer to call it a welfare system at this stage. Yeah. It's more of a harm system. And it's really difficult, isn't it? And I think people are having to, and actually we speak to carers all the time who, in reality, want very little, compared to what they contribute. So I think how we manage...
want some damn help.
Yeah, and actually these things are all connected, aren't they? How we treat and pay and support paid care workers, and the needs and the rights of the people they care for and their family member or friend. These things are all connected, and we have to think about them much more together, because it matters, carers and the people that receive, of course they care, like how much somebody gets paid. They want that work to be valued. They want those people to be supported and trained, So I think it is really important. And I think, so I think the care robots is a kind of funny thing, isn't it? And it can never replace human contact. But actually, if it can do some functional...
It will replace human jobs, is the thing, though, won't it? It'll at least some of them, because it will be cost-saving, It looks cheaper on a balance sheet.
Yeah. But
then the outcomes will be completely different, so you'll have to spend more further down the line.
And I think it's inherently that we as a society need to change, and what we try and do, we want to change the conversation about care. If people believe that it's inherently valuable and it's something, and also unpaid care is something we're all going to do. We're all going to do it or receive it. So it's not a niche thing that happens to other people over there. This is all of us. Then we have to change the conversations about why you get paid more to fix a car than you do to look after children or to work in a care home. It's all kind of the wrong way around, isn't it? But it's such a fundamental shift. And so we do a lot here where we're saying, don't talk about carers as unsung heroes and saints. They're people in circumstances that are way out of their control, and they're trying to do the best they can. It's very othering, isn't it, to kind of describe people in a way that isn't real.
Yeah, all this kind of backhanded sort of pedestaling, championing, like as if, we praise you. We're not going to do anything about it, but we will have a little parade for you.
Yeah.
But we're not concerned with your issues or your problems.
Yeah. And I think for unpaid carers, it's even more difficult because it's hidden, it's happening in people's homes, it's done out of love. That's the idea, that if you do something out of love, then... again...
Where's the profit incentive there?
Yeah. Or also that you kind of doing it, so it's okay. You can tolerate all sorts of things that we wouldn't expect other people in other situations to tolerate.
Well, you're a good person, so as a good person you should suffer and get paid less because you're good and you're going to heaven.
And so it's really, and I think it is that sort of thing that really gets in the way of us saying, actually, this is...
Actually, can we just be nice here and now and try a bit harder?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on the social media front then, do you actually have to do any? I assume there's the basic kind of, you be online and you'll interact with people on whichever platform, potentially LinkedIn, of like you know, you might have the odd contact that you come through, or you'll exchange social media. I don't get the impression you spend that much time posting. And
so we do a bit. I mean, it's a bit.
I mean, you personally, do you post much for work, I guess?
I probably post less than I used to. So I was quite active on Twitter. So I've always been quite active on Twitter, but as a sort of, you know, this thing of these are my individual views, but putting there where I work. And so most of the stuff that I do on Twitter, we're supposed to call it X now, is putting things out there about carers.
Yeah.
So and we have a kind of Twitter site at Carers Leeds, and we use Facebook to engage with carers. We use LinkedIn a little bit, but Instagram much less so.
Well, you've got to be wherever they are, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think some ways it's really useful for reaching people who wouldn't necessarily. So for Twitter, I think it's much more about professionals, isn't it? I think for us anyway. Do you do a lot
on WhatsApp?
So we have got
WhatsApp groups and stuff for various
Yeah, so we do more of the sort of broadcast stuff on WhatsApp, but Facebook is often the sort of groups and the organising and information there more for carers.
Yeah.
I think X probably use it more for engaging professionals, or you know, we get involved in so we
journalists,
absolutely. And I think for us as an organisation, you know, we provide a service to unpaid carers. It's really important that we do that well. But also we see our remit as trying to influence other people to do things to help improve the lives of carers in Leeds. So we will get involved in national campaigns, you know, around things like carers allowance, or we will work with us. We will highlight issues, you know. So sometimes then I think we use social media to do that. Probably a bit less than we used to in terms of things feel like they've shifted, particularly on things like X. And but I think still feel like it's part of trying to reach some professionals, or like you say, some kind of journalists or policymakers, or and also as a vehicle to things like Facebook. Is still a good vehicle, I think, to sort of linking in with carers to say, this is what we're doing, this is what's happening locally.
Do you have to do much fundraising? Because I would guess if it was fundraising, that would go via social media, a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, we do a real mix. So we have, we get money from Leeds City Council, we go to trusts and foundations to get bigger amounts. I mean, we do a limited amount of fundraising ourselves because we haven't got the staff to do that.
I guess you've got to keep it kind of small, haven't you? Because you want a core group of people with knowledge and skills that you can keep in position and that you can keep supported, because, you know, you've got to support your own staff kind of first so that they can support everyone else. So I'm guessing, it's more about a core team and then like volunteering built on, and I guess you would look for a pot of money for a project perhaps, or
So we try and be quite intentional with the money in the sense that we're very clear about what we're there to do, to provide information, advice and support to carers. And so anything that we look for funding to do has got to fit within the remit of what we do. And also be driven by, you know, what carers are telling us that they want and they need. And so, so I think it's very much a kind of, quite an intentional strategy. And also, you know, we employ a team of 50 staff, you know, probably a bit bigger than people realise in terms of, being able to kind of, again, back to that is so important to support the staff team, isn't it? And that people have job security and good terms and conditions and the support they need exactly to do that work.
Do I want to say anything else on social media? Do you want to say anything else on social media? Because normally the discussion around it is more, because it's about the promotion, the look at me razzmatazz of it. And for you guys, it's more of a tool. It's more of an essential tool of like, it's another it's another way of reaching people, another way of supporting people, and another way of carers to reach you and to be able to access you. Has that led to can it keep the hours, or do you have to have a 24-hour response element as well of like when people need you? Like, so do people expect to have messages answered at any time of the day?
I don't think so, no. Okay. No, and we definitely don't have a capacity to do that. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, having conversations about what next when it comes to digital around that. Because, you know, for example, I don't think anyone really wants a carers Leeds chatbot on the website. But we'd also be good to have a function where if someone had a question about something that was actually, you know, I don't know, how do I apply for carers allowance, for example, to be able to respond to that. If that carer, the best time for the carer to try and find out information was 11 o'clock at night. So I think it's an interesting one for us, and that's one thing that we will explore is a kind of how do you use digital, a bit back to the care robots, isn't it? Like, is there a place for it? It can't subsidise human, because we are a human business and an organisation, but actually is there a place for some of that to be incorporated into what we do, so that if you are, you know, that's why like our website's important, because some people are looking for information and advice at a time when we're not open. So how do we make sure? So
is it then, like, I'm just thinking of this now, is it then the technology should always be about accessibility, about increasing accessibility?
It is exactly that. It is exactly that. Because I think, and that's how we almost see it. Because also for some people, they want to seek information at times when services aren't open, or book something. You know, I think I would love in the future for us to be able to have, you know, online booking so that you could book an appointment for the next day. So we need to be having some of those things that can really help things be more accessible to the people that use those kind of things, you know. And I think if you're a working carer, or you know, you're someone who's not very comfortable in picking up the phone and having a chat, or dropping in or coming to a group, but actually you could do with some information and a bit of advice, then I think for us, thinking about how digital, how social media helps us add to what we're doing rather than substitute, I think is a really important part of where we see, you know, where I see the organisation going, that you would never replace your team with a load of robots, but there's a place for some of this stuff. Because, like you say, the access...
But if someone gives you a bunch of robots, you'll be like, yeah, I'll take them.
Yeah. And we'll just do, you know, be really, really clear about what you're doing. Yeah. I don't want any of the staff team listening to this and worrying that, you know, their jobs are at risk.
So just while we're on the kind of digital social media sort of thing, in terms of the website, I should have checked the website again before I came today. I am a bad podcaster. I'm not doing my research.
Don't worry.
So, I mean, I noticed a bunch of the flyers and so on in the foyer. Large part of it's giving people information, the latest information, because as we know, with policy and governments and stuff, changes all the time.
Things change, exactly.
You know, for reasons as well, because there are, you know, sometimes for good reasons. So is the website constantly changing, constantly updating? You know, is it a repository for various bits of information, or do you keep it quite light and slim and it's more of a signpost into the service of like, ring us up, speak to an actual person, we'll tell you what's going on because we actually know?
Very interesting, because we've just commissioned people to redo our website. Because I think probably until now it's probably the latter. So it was almost like the way you can contact us is by the phone.
Yeah, it's just it's a page that's got your phone number everywhere going, ring us, ring.
And some other things, whereas actually what we want to do, you know, we talk about our advice line is almost the front door to our service, that most people, you know, come into contact with carers by picking up the phone and ringing that number, or we have a literal front door and then come in that. We want the website to be the virtual front door, and at the moment it's not. And so that's the ambition, that it does say to you, if you need help now, this is what you can do. And also here's some information that we think, you know, other carers tell us is useful. And for some people that's enough, isn't it? They just want to know, oh, okay, what am I entitled to? What can I do? right, brilliant, that's enough for now. I might give them a ring if I need them. So yeah, it's trying to again make, you know, so that actually for carers who are more comfortable with that way of accessing a service, even if it's just initially, they get the same level of quality of service that I know they'll get if they pick up the phone to us or they come in the building. And that's what we want. That's what's important, really. So yeah, so that's watch this space.
Okay. Okay, so we'll do Brexit. I don't think we'll spend that long on this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to check the time. Do you have to dash off for anything in particular?
I think, no, I think I need to be done by 12, but yeah.
Okay, have you, oh,
no.
You've got a clock. Okay, so if I'm running, if I get to like 22.
Yeah, yeah.
I've hardly got through anything.
Yeah.
Give me a hurry
I'll give
up.
you a nod.
So Brexit.
Yeah.
Has it changed anything for you work-wise? Have you noticed any change?
Do you know what? I really thought about this, and I don't think it. I can't really see.
The only thing I could think of is, you know, and this is from the news, so it's not based on any kind of real experience. So you would have to verify. But in terms of, you know, EU citizens leaving medicine and so on, and various bits of care, that would put pressure on some of the services potentially, and then other, you know, other pressures on the service, but that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, and it may
that's kind of like daily stuff, isn't it? It's like, oh, well, everything's difficult. That's
and I think that, because I think we don't have any sort of European funding that would be impacted. I mean, I think there is a massive, I feel like it's a collision of things, isn't it, that's creating those real challenges within health and social care. So I'm absolutely sure Brexit is one of those. And public sector funding and COVID and all of these things. So I think we do see the impact of all of those things, particularly on unpaid carers. So often on the people that we, you know, so for example, we know people are waiting longer for hospital appointments or access to social care or mental health support. And so I think that's the impact that we see as an organisation, that perhaps, you know, it's never been in abundance for sure, but actually, you know, knowing that if actually someone's coming to you and what they really need is a therapeutic response, you know, some really, you know, some mental health support that's beyond what we can do, we know that people are going to wait for that even longer. And I think that's where it really bites for our staff, who do a brilliant job, but actually it's really hard to be sitting in front of people, and sometimes what you're having to do is to help manage people's expectations of how long they might have to wait for a social care assessment, for example. And that's tough. I think that's really tough, because most of the time we'd love people to come to us early, before things reach crisis point. Life isn't really like that. No. And people come when things are hard. You cope until you can't, don't you? You're like, no, I got this. I got this. And then I haven't something got this. Happens, and then you're saying to someone it's a 12-week wait for an assessment, let alone anything else. So,
but that's it. When the crisis comes, it's too late, because there's nothing. There is no crisis response now.
So I think those things feel even tougher. I think they've always been difficult. But those things feel even tougher, I think, because, you know, people are going to have to wait. And the organisations like ours do a brilliant job at supporting people and providing a range of things.
But you're picking up the slack, but it's not effective to your goals, kind of thing. It's like, it's sort of having more to do when you should be kind of having less to do, sort of thing. And I think it's slowing down the work, I guess. But you're still providing what needs to be provided.
And often, I mean, this is another, you know, phenomenal thing about the voluntary sector, is often we're reaching people that really don't trust, you know, the council, social services, you know, our health services even. So I do think, again, you're often getting people that would come and into contact with us who are very, very reluctant to access statutory services, you know, even if they could get them tomorrow. And so I think that's the other thing that we're able to do, along with our fellow charities in the cities, you reaching, you know, people with the greatest need, biggest health inequality, people experiencing poverty, you know, and some of that group of people don't want, you know, are very reluctant to access statutory services. And part of our job is to try and help them understand what's available and to support them to make those decisions. But yeah, so I think that's where we probably see it. But for me, it's tied up in a whole range of other sort of social and economic issues that are really, really, I think people are really struggling, and things we know about care. You're more likely to be in poverty if you're a carer than you're not, if you don't care for somebody. And they're the kind of statistics you look at, Joseph Rowntree stats, and they stay. The poverty rate amongst carers have pretty much stayed the same for the last 15 years. And they're not always the group of people that people immediately think about when they think about people living in poverty. So I think, again, part of our role is to make that visible.
And with an ageing population as well, that's going to be more and more of the working age population and of people, you're losing that skills, you're losing the experience, you're losing the knowledge from, if we're all obsessed with the market, from the market sector and stuff.
Absolutely.
And or from the public sector. Like people in the public sector have people that they care for, and some people have to drop out of their roles because...
Absolutely. And we support a lot of parents of children with additional needs. So again, they're another sort of group of people that are poorly served by the system and have to fight for a lot of things. And often, again, those stories of parents having to give up work because of the, volume of appointments, or their child can't get into a local school, so they have to get taken to school somewhere across the city. All these things that people are doing day in, day out, that I think, again, for most people is pretty invisible.
And it's, and the sort of, the grind culture thing, there's just this sort of obliviousness to, you've just got to work really hard and so on. It's like, well, people are working really hard, but they also have stuff to deal with. It's like, we're not all at this perfect zero, but we're just on our own and we can just do what we want and only think of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think it's really important. I think it's really important to have those conversations in work, because I think things have moved on, haven't they, in terms of childcare and being a parent at work. We don't have the same for someone who's caring for another family member. It's not the same conversation. And I think for us, moving that conversation on to be saying, this is something that most people will do and are likely to do, in their working age. So actually, how do we get better at saying this is part of what happens in life? And how do workplaces, support people to, we hear a lot from carers that they have left work, they've forgone opportunities at work, they don't feel comfortable telling their line manager.
I can't take a promotion because it'll mean more responsibility, more hours, I can't commit to it, I'm like at my limit already.
And so I think those kinds of things, having that conversation that actually, if you want to retain and recruit good people, some of those are going to have, like, say, things going on outside of work. And that's, again, is life.
All of them, if they stay, like, if you're such a great company that all your staff are like, I'm staying here, like, they will go through stuff because they're alive.
And so I think it is really important. And actually, I think that's where organisations like ours, like Organisation Volunteer, can really lead the way on some of this. Because we really get it, we really, really get it, And for me, if we're not practicing what we preach to others, then I might as well just pack up and go home. It's so important. It's so important. And you show you can run a brilliant service and support your staff and provide flexibility and consider well-being. It's like, these things are not, you can do all of those things. They can be part of the same. So I think it is really important. And I think having those conversations about that, actually acknowledging that people have a life outside of work isn't them saying they're not committed to their work, is it? It's stuff of life. This is life. So so I think we're a long way off that conversation of people. I think it's easier, not everywhere, for people to say, I need to leave early to pick up the kids. I don't think it's easy for people to say, my mum, I'm going to go visit my mum, or I'm going to go take her to this appointment, or I'm going to, I think in some workplaces it is. Some are really good. I think, maybe controversial, but I think that also relates to where you stand in the workplace. Not just in the hierarchy, but there is that.
But also, like, how long you've been there, how embedded you are,
Yeah.
like, that gives you, you know, you get more leeway, don't you, if you've been around for a long time and they kind of like you.
Yeah. And I think as employers, what we need to be doing is asking people those questions when they start as a positive thing, as in, like, we know everyone's got stuff going on. You know, we want to start in a way that means you can be yourself at work, you know. And just being able to say, this is the kind of place where that's okay and it's important to us that you're able to do that. And I think that's the stuff that we need to be doing more of, to shift things, to say, you know, this stuff is really important and it doesn't go against you in any way. Why would it go against, you know, this is just part of being, you know, a person. Yeah.
And, you know, if you give people things, they're grateful. Most people. Most people are like, oh, thanks for that thing you gave me. Whether that's more time, a bit of understanding, or just some time.
Yes. You know. And I think the idea that you'll open the floodgates to something that you can't manage
is just take the mickey.
It's not. I think, you know, our experience, particularly, you know, going back to unpaid care, is that what people want is really, in the big scheme of life, is tiny. Bit of a break. Bit of
help, bit of consideration, of like, a lot of the time it's not even that. They don't need you doing loads of stuff. They're just like, can you just recognise, like, what I'm actually doing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is really, I think those things are really important. And I think sometimes people don't, it's not visible, isn't it? If you've not done it, you've not experienced it, don't know people that are doing it, then you've got no sense. But if it happens, I think, you know, it's like a light's, you know, switched on and people go, oh, okay, right, this is what it is. This is what it means to care for somebody else.
Okay, so I'm going to do Brexit. I don't think this will be, sorry, not Brexit, done that. Climate change. I don't think this will be particularly long. Might be. I mean, I guess there are various strains on the people that you're delivering the service to and the way that you're trying to deliver the service from various weather conditions and so on. But for your work, does it... I mean, like I say, there's a way in to say, yes, it does affect things. But like for yourself in your work, is there any kind of... Does climate change cross your path in your work?
I mean, I think it does, in the sense that we are, in sort of thinking about sustainability, so thinking about how do we run our organisation, for example, and, you know, even down to the sort of, you know, paper and printing, you know, that kind of thing about what could we do day in, day out to really think about sustainability. So I think it impacts in that very practical kind of how does it work day in, day out.
Do you think about the place-based sort of elements of that? You know, you're based in a place and focused on a place, being Leeds. And, you know, that's the big climate thing, you know, rather than trying to jet all over the world. And you're looking at the local area, you're looking at building community, you're looking at having that community be sustainable and local. And the resource is generally people. So, you know, given the current conditions can support people, that's a renewable resource.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then I think we think about the impact. Again, it's more on the sort of day-to-day impact. What does it mean for the people that we serve in Leeds, socially and economically? So, you know things like if you are supporting somebody with a disability or a health condition, you're likely to need the heating on more. You may have to use, you know, it's more difficult. Elements, so much more how it impacts on the cost of living, how you get around the city, you know, in terms of how much more difficult it is to use public transport.
And depending on where you live, how good that transport is and the access.
So I think in a way we see it more and more in those kind of day-to-day impacts that I think, you know, people having to make decisions around, you know, we provide grants to carers who are, you know, choosing between heating and eating, you know. So I think where we're trying to think about those things, the housing that people live in, you know, those kind of things that can actually help them day in, day out with their costs and their environment, but also are solutions that are sustainable.
I'm thinking about the built environment. Like, obviously, you'll see things like, you know, the adjustments can be made to buildings and properties in terms of like ramps and so on. But with, well, let's just say hotter and wetter. So with like much hotter days, and obviously a built environment stores heat, much hotter if you haven't got very green spaces. And obviously the more deprived areas in Leeds generally tend to be more concretey.
Exactly.
So they're going to be, you know, hotter, and, you know, I guess when there'll be areas that will be in flooding areas. So these impacts will impact, you know, people who are caring and given caring responsibilities.
Absolutely.
That's probably going to be something that becomes more of a bigger issue going forward. I'm just thinking of that as a challenge. I have no solutions for that at the moment.
But I think these are really important things about the context in which we work, isn't it? And the changing nature of the climate and the environment in that way, that absolutely has an impact on people's day-to-day lives and their experiences.
And there'll be conditions that have sensitivities to, I mean, pollen, the increase of pollen and stuff. I mean, hay fever. It's like, oh, hay fever. But it's still an allergy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I'm sure there are extreme hay fever reactions that can be very debilitating and possibly fatal. I don't know. But
I think definitely we see it in people's health conditions or disabilities, that it kind of adds another layer, doesn't it?
It's another complication.
And also if you're worrying about money, it acts as another layer to that, isn't it? Like, what's the environment like where you live, you know, that...
Yeah, and if we start having days where they're kind of like, don't go into work, it's too bad outside. That's affecting your earnings. That's affecting you. And
you think about what it's like to be in a wheelchair on a very, very rainy day like today. It's not pleasant. So so I think it's more...
Or in the heat as well when it's really hot. The metal parts.
So I do think it's those kind of day-to-day things where we think actually things can be that little bit tougher for people. Absolutely.
Okay, I'm not going to spend too long on that because I'm going to... These are the questions that I'm more interested in.
Okay.
The last two, because they're a bit more fun, you know. They're a bit more like, oh, I can imagine whatever. So we'll do the change question as first as normal. Sometimes I'll swap them around. So if you could change any 3 things about your work, what would you change? So you can be totally fantastic, you can be really pragmatic. You don't have to have 3, but...
I think what I'd really like to change is... I think the way that organisations like Carers Leeds and other charities are perceived. Because I think sometimes people think that we are well-meaning volunteers who are doing a good thing, and that's lovely, isn't it? You know, whereas actually I think we are hugely professional. I work with people that are incredibly skilled at what they do. And actually I feel like I want that to be more well-known and more visible, that actually it's really, really important that, as charities, we do the thing that has the most impact. That's what we're there for. We're not there just to be nice people helping out, you know. It's actually about making a difference in the world. And actually the group of people that I work with here are phenomenal, you know, and they are, what they bring to the workplace is amazing, you know. So the idea that, some of it's language, isn't it? Voluntary makes people think about volunteers. But I feel like, you know, what we've talked about, isn't it, that we're reaching people that other services don't reach. We're trying to tackle some really, really tough challenges, both social and economic. So I think for me, that idea that, you know, it's a really important thing we're doing here. And actually, I think, you know, sometimes I feel frustrated that it's not always given the status that I think it should have.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we mentioned with other charities of how, you know, but earlier in the discussion of like, you think of charities as being about campaigns or whatever. And it is very much like, it's like particular diseases get their sort of... for some reason I'm visualing pop stars. Like each condition's like its own celebrity sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Like, whereas you're not focused on anything as niche as that. You've got a similar problem to me in that I'm not niched enough. I'm too general. I'm looking at the whole of Leeds rather than a specific thing. And generalism is Yeah, it's an odd one.
Yeah.
So I do with think specialism, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. Or things people can instantly go, oh yeah, you know.
Yeah, they either know what it is, or they don't know what it is, and they can go, what is that?
Yeah.
Whereas something like that's general, it's too complicated to explain because it's like, oh well, there's this element and this element, and so everyone's bored by that.
Yeah. So I think it is, and I think it is something about. So I think related to that, my second one is more about. Just about the funding, you know, that often charities are very good at doing things with small amounts of money. That's fine. You know, we can do that. But I think, you know, the lack of sustainable funding, the lack of, you know, being able to, you know, things take time, don't they? You know, when you're trying to work on really difficult issues or supporting a group of people that have incredibly complex lives, that takes time to build. And so I think sometimes the kind of funding model with charities is you get little bits of money, it's short term, it's for shiny things, it's for projects, whereas doing the core business of running a charity and providing a core service, we're back to that, what people are interested in. That's much less appealing to funders than a new thing that you're doing over there. And so for me, you know, the idea that you can just run charities can run themselves and they shouldn't have managers and they shouldn't have admin is crazy. Because we're organised, we've got an organisation of 50 people. You've got to have some infrastructure around it, don't you? So I think for me...
You've got money coming in and money going out.
Yeah.
But you need, you know, accounts and bureaucrats to manage that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's really important, isn't it, that the information, the way that we communicate what we do, as well as the direct support that we provide, you know. So I think those things for me are the things where I think, oh yeah, really, I think they're probably the two things. I'm not sure. I was trying to think if I had a third, but I think there's a lot tied up in those, I think. The kind of status of charities like ours and the funding model, you know, I think those are the things where I think, God, you know, we're doing brilliant things here, and I want to be able to, you know, support that to happen, and for people to recognise that actually that's a group of professionals doing a really good job. Actually, this is not a kind of tilt your head to one side and say, oh, aren't they nice, those carers, these people? Are
you quite good at capturing testimonials and promoting them? And
I think we are. Yeah. I think we are, and I think with care, with unpaid care, you have to tread this line of. It's valuable. It's inherently valuable. It's a good thing to do. We need to recognise what people are doing. Also
it's also one of the most human things to do.
So it's valuable, but it's also, if you don't support people to do it and they're doing it over a long period of time without enough support and it's quite intensive, it can have real massive consequences.
And it can become harmful, you know, because
so trying to balance those two things, those messages, is the art, I think, of it, is because you want people to know that it's a valuable thing, but also that it's not right that people do it at the cost to their own health and money. It's, you know, that actually that's not something that we should as a society just say, well, it's out of love, so it's okay.
Yep, and I won't go any further with any of that. Okay. So next we'll do UBI, the Universal Basic Income. So... I mean, so the question is, how might it affect your work? I am guessing with this, for you, it would be more about the people that you're supporting than for you specifically. But yeah, so, you know what we're talking about when you do UBI?
Yes.
So it's a floor on payment and not a ceiling. So regular payment going to everybody. How might it change things for you?
I think I suppose firstly, I'm probably undecided on whether I think universal basic income is a
good idea.
It sounds like a good idea, but I also feel very strongly that I think that in progressive policies, so for me, it's kind of who the people with the greatest need get the most. And so I think that's part of the challenge for me with the sort of universal basic income idea, as I understand it, and it might be that I don't fully understand it, is that I think it's a good idea, and in one level that for me, you know, that's what the welfare state's there to do, isn't it? It's to provide a safety net. That's its purpose. And I suppose the challenge with it being universal and basic for everybody is that, you know, arguably the people that might benefit most are the people who are not the worst off. So I think that's my question around it in terms of how, you know, how does it help? So for example, if we're saying that carers are more likely to be in poverty than somebody who isn't caring, then actually how do we really think about that in terms of recognising? And I'm very clear, I suppose, at the moment that things like carers allowance do not do that well enough. It's called an allowance, which again, even the language around it, isn't it, makes you think actually. So I do think that the idea of welfare benefits being more generous and that actually making sure that everybody who needs it has a safety net is absolutely fundamental. So those things I think would be very positive. I think this idea of if you target welfare benefits to certain groups that really need them, is that better? So they're my questions around it.
Also, does it work?
Yeah.
Can you do it?
And I think that's part of the challenge, isn't it? Yeah. That the current systems are really complicated and difficult, and actually, you know, for something like care
and clearly have evidence of, you know, people who can who know how to work the system and get some kind of benefit from it, and then people who are pushed out of it entirely, who are desperately in need of it.
And we do know, don't we, that, you know, of even things like pension credit or certain means-sense benefits, people underclaim, and you know. So
and none of it, you know, like compared to tax evasion, that benefits fraud is nothing.
No.
It's a tiny, negligible amount. It's nothing. Yeah.
So I think there definitely needs to be a reform, and I think if we're talking specifically about carers, it is really important, you know. And for me, the idea that you recognise what carers are doing and that's what the welfare benefit relates to. You know, at the minute we know with carers allowance, you've got to be caring for 30 hours a week.
I was going to say
you can't earn more than £151 a week.
Why?
Yeah, and if you go a penny over,
you don't get it, or you get your wage docked or something.
Well, basically what happens is you lose it all. Yeah,
so then you have to fill in all the forms again and wait another 25 years.
So what we're seeing in the news recently was, you know, some carers having the situation that we are familiar with where, you know, for example, your wage goes up, your minimum wage goes up, it tips you over the £151. Department for Work Pensions see that, but they don't communicate that with you until
and it's their job to ensure everyone stays in poverty.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I can say that.
You can say that, I can't say that. But I think that whole then carers being pursued aggressively for large sums of money that they didn't really realise. You know, they're not, through no fault of their own, have gone over by very small amounts. Well, and then what it does is it makes...
When they're caring for a loved one, surprisingly, they don't want to spend all their time reading government policy and forms and clauses and conditionalities for what, like maybe 20 quid a week or something extra. It's like, I'll forego it and just have the stress.
And I think that's what we see people doing.
Well, that's how it's incentivised,
I'm too scared now to do that. So I definitely
if people don't claim it, the problem doesn't exist, does it?
And I think there definitely needs, you know, if you look at that specific benefit, massively in need of reform. Universal basic income is a good idea. It simplifies it. I think the risk for me is that what do we do with the you know, this principle of the people who need it, who have the greatest need, get the most. But also, you know, I completely get that actually the current systems, the complexity of them, isn't it? They're kind of like, say, people don't claim, don't get what they're entitled to. But I think that's the risk, I suppose, is that, you know, for me, the more progressive, the better when it comes to things like that. But I also know with that comes more complexity, doesn't it? And I think current evidence, you know, historical evidence says governments aren't that great at doing complex projects like, you know, universal credit, for example. So I do think there is a sort of, it's an interesting thing to bring into the conversation, isn't it, around welfare benefits. What are they for? Who are they for? And what does it mean? And I think definitely the message that's we all need a bit of extra help sometimes. And actually that's what the welfare state's there to do, is a really strong message.
Well, equally, we should be living in a society where we're like, well, we're not going to tolerate homelessness.
Yeah.
We're just not.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want people using the streets as a toilet for a start, you know? And, you know, I don't know how we get there.
No.
Because apparently my species really, really likes having people being in horrible, horrible positions, and for, you know, our foreseeable future to be very horrible looking. And what's wrong with us?
I know. And back to that point, I suppose I was making about what we value, isn't it? And this whole thing about care and how it isn't valued as something that is a really important part of being human, and something that I think we get sometimes a little bit squeamish at adding a monetary value to something that, like say, should be done out of love and kindness. When actually I'm saying, right, we need to get over that. Yeah,
but it doesn't have to be done out of love and kindness. It has to be done out of a logical, like, you know, rational self-preservation of like, keep people healthy, keep people around. Because when they die, that hurts. It hurts somebody, and, you know, and that hurt echoes around society. So it's like, try and make it's hard enough. Try and make it a bit nicer.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely agree with that.
So this is the point where I throw it over to you. We've covered loads.
We have.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about, or that you want to ask about? Anything that you want to chat about, or do you want to get on record? Or anything like that? If not, where can people find Carers Leeds and find out more?
Well, I think, Carers Leeds, we exist to serve unpaid carers who are caring for an adult or parents caring for children with additional needs. So just Google us and you'll get our details. But our advice line number is 0113 380 4300. So again, just, you know, if you think you're an unpaid carer and you want to understand what support and help might be out there, then, you know, just pick up a phone.
Thank you again to Claire for being my guest. Thanks as always to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. If you'd like to know more about Carers Leeds, you can ring the advice line on 0113 380 4300, Monday to Thursday 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. and Friday 9 a.m. till 4:30 p.m. or email advice@carersleeds.org.uk or find them on the web at carersleeds.org.uk. I have put the links to their socials in the show notes. If you're living or working or caring in an LS postcode, or if you're from Leeds and working elsewhere in the world, however you are Leeds, I'd love you to be one of the 1,000 loiners to help me make working hours. Please be my guest on this podcast. It's free, and you get to prove what you said before I publish. You can email working hours at workinghourspod@western-studios.com if you would like to make a podcast series, or just a podcast on its own. Don't forget you can do that and support Working Hours by buying podcast services from me at Western Studios Leeds. Email makemypodcast@westernstudios.com. Okay, that's me. Work for peace and plan with kindness. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page on the site to drop me a message about either Working Hours or about your own Leeds podcast project. Keep up to date with Working Hours and find out about the other great Leeds podcasts that Western Studios is involved with by following Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/western-studios. Western Studios Leeds is available to loiners to help them realise their own podcast projects for only £30 for an hour of audio podcast work or £40 for an hour of video podcast work. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com with details of your project and what support you want to get your Leeds podcast made. Whatever your podcast question or need, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.